Oh, Captain, till we find where the treasure be. I see beyond the sea. Oh, Captain, till we go on a journey. Follow me, we shall go foreign.
One of my favorite channels has a new post. And I learned about it because my husband watched it, which I think I turned him onto this channel a little bit. He makes really, really good videos, but he does not post often. And I'll put it into perspective as far as like how much I really like this channel. He did an almost 6-hour video on EVE Online, a game that I have never played, but it was really well done. So I listened to the entire thing. I'm not listening to it here, don't worry. I don't have that kind of time. This one is like an hour long, but so this is Fredrik Knudsen? That depends on if the K is silent or not. I don't know how to say his name. I don't think he's said it in the videos. But this is his Down the Rabbit Hole series. And this one is called Boatmurdered. I kind of know what it's about, or at least what it starts to be about, which is Dwarf Fortress. Does it stay there? I don't know. I have no idea. I just know that I heard Dwarf Fortress, and I was like, oh. So this is a blind reaction because I haven't watched it. I really didn't hear very much of it at all. Just enough to be like, who is that? Because I recognize the voice. So, all right, here we go. His videos are so good. And I know the reason it takes so long is because of how much he researches them, the scripts, and all that. It's just...
On August 8th, 2006, the earliest iteration of the game Dwarf Fortress was published. Developed by brothers Tarn and Zach Adams, Dwarf Fortress is a colony simulation game renowned both for its remarkable level of detail and its impenetrable level of difficulty.
I have played this a little bit, not this version, the newer version with the better art. Nothing wrong with this. This is how it started. That's awesome, but everything has to start somewhere. But the one with the like drawn maps and stuff, I'm not very good at it. But who is?
The game was nearly impossible to parse visually for new players upon release. Utilizing ASCII characters for its graphics, the screen initially appeared
My
as
husband
a
did
jumbled
play
mess
this
of
version,
letters
though.
and punctuation marks. There is no single canon world in Dwarf Fortress, but instead, worlds are randomly generated with unique historical figures, places, governments, and guilds, each titled using a constructed language whose words are combined to create absurd names for characters such as Melville Drillpage, Jowl Slopchone, and Kerr Fisthorse, while places are given titles like...
Oh my gosh. What was the name of that show? Oh my, it did not last that long. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah. So, did any of y'all ever watch Crodmandoon? If you didn't, that's fine. It was like definitely not for kids. It was
Portal Router.
It was it was interesting. And Fifth Horse, the reason I'm bringing this up is Fifth Horse makes me think of one of the characters' names. Their last name was Horse Draper. But of course, if you say that wrong, if you say it too fast, it sounds like something else that I'm not going to say.
And Quake Roars. Dwarf Fortress's detailed nature extends to perhaps the most notorious aspect of the game. The body of each character is tracked to minute levels, including individual hands and organs.
Wow.
And this includes
I didn't
not
know that.
only injuries, but also status effects, such as whether or not that
Is that still true with the more artistic one and I just missed it? It's possible. That could be why I'm bad at it.
part of the body is wet or dirty with
y'all want
some
me to play it?
particular substance. Given that the player's control over the game is limited to delineating tasks that must then be executed by a dwarf on their own time and at their own discretion, it is possible for chain reactions of events to occur suddenly and with little warning.
Yes,
Their
yes
causes
it is.
manifesting
Yep.
beneath the player's notice, lost in the shuffle of information with little way to immediately address them. Such difficulty gave the game its popular tagline, "Losing is fun." Dwarf Fortress would
It is,
quickly
though.
find an audience among internet denizens due in large part to its freeware model, downloadable from the internet, and it was particularly beloved by members of the Something Awful forums,
Of course.
who would share their experiences with one another.
So, I haven't had anything like particularly insane happen. But I did keep seeing people just mysteriously dead and animals, and it's like you can't do anything with them. You can't, as far as I can tell, you couldn't move them, you couldn't bury them. So it's like this is gonna cause sickness.
Often in the form of a Let's Play. Before the establishment and widespread adoption of video hosting platforms, Let's Plays more typically took the form of forum posts describing a person's experience with a game, often with illustrative screenshots, and the bespoke nature of each Dwarf Fortress world and its confusing graphical style meant that the game lent itself well to this sort of sharing. These stories would usually end
I
in
could absolutely see
misadventure and
that.
catastrophe, much to the glee of those reading. What's more, since games of Dwarf Fortress are saved as discrete files, they can easily be shared with other players, and this allowed for a popular and unique method of play. Succession games. Organizing together on the Something Awful forums, players would take turns playing a save file and then passing it to another person after some amount of in-game time had passed. But, given that Dwarf Fortress has no clearly defined goals, nor any victory state, succession games often included half-finished projects and half-addressed problems, which would inevitably cause ruin for the settlement, and
That makes
this
sense.
would result in one of the most infamous and legendary gaming stories in the internet's history.
I probably heard about this on oh gosh, what is his channel? Seth, I'm not saying that last name, but Seth Zintach? I said I was going to say that name and then I said it. I am 90% certain that what he's about to go over is something that I have heard of, but it's been so long and I could be completely off the mark. But I think Seth covered this. I think. Don't quote me. I mean, you can quote me on that because I said I think.
In November of 2006, forum user Tourette Dog made a post to the Something Awful forums. His introduction read, quote, "Have you ever wanted to be a dwarf, dig into mountain halls, and fear unholy amphibious undead elephants that scale walls and murder your entire family while you sleep? Your wait is over, your dream is here, and that dream is the official Goon Dwarf Fortress Succession game."
Oh my gosh.
End quote. The rules were simple. At the end of every in-game year, the player would save their game and submit the file to the next person in line, who would then play another in-game year. Notably, one of the questions in the FAQ section read, "I'm not very good at this game. Can I still play?" The answer read, "Hell yeah." Prognosticating a
That's good.
self-encouraged
That's
doom,
fantastic.
Tourette Dog wrote the prologue to this Let's Play
That name,
to set
though.
the scene. Quote, in the year 1050, the dwarven civilization of Kin Melville, the Oaken Tomes, exhausted the last of its mines. Driven by lust for gold and rumors of the priceless and all but mythical metal adamantine, a team of 7 colonists was dispatched to build a new home for the dwarves of Kin Melville in the Smooth Points of Pride. The first year of diaries from the ill-fated foreman of the mine were recovered, giving some hint as to the beginnings of the fortress that once stood there, if not its mysterious and presumably gruesome fate.
That's pretty detailed.
Here, the conceit
like
of
it.
the Let's Play was established. The players would take the role of an administrator within the settlement and write journal entries to detail their experiences, one after the other, cataloging their misadventures and thought processes behind their decisions, though this would not stop a player who believed that they knew better when it was their turn.
I mean, that
Another
makes
challenge
sense.
would simply be the location. As Tourette Dog described it, quote, the new fortress site is truly in the puckered sphincter of nowhere. The nearest civilization, if you can call it that, is a goblin citadel to the northeast. But the guildsman swears they've surveyed for precious metals, and this is the best spot. There's also a river nearby, which means one underground, which means we can start our farm without much trouble once we dig to it. Of course, he waits till he's leaving to tell us the name of the site. End quote. Beneath this writing was a screenshot of text introducing the settlement. A new chapter of dwarven history begins here at this place, Koganu-san. Boatmurdered. Strike the earth. This settlement, however, was not simply in a forest, but a wild one, replete with monkeys and, even more dangerous, elephants. Elephants in Dwarf Fortress are temperamental and powerful creatures.
I bet they are.
Attack without warning if something draws too close.
I didn't see any elephants.
Once they have been angered, it's difficult to make them stop, short of trapping them in a cage or dispatching them.
There was like an
The
angry
problems
wizard
that they
or something
posed
nearby that
quickly
was
revealed themselves
always
when the
threatening.
first trade caravan arrived in the autumn. Quote, merchants trying to dodge the elephants. The betting pool's up to 10 stone blocks and a rat skull. We really need to make some coins. I guess the trade depot was a good idea, but we'll see if we can finish it before they get here or get eaten by those bloody pachyderms. After the traders arrived, Tourette Dog lamented their limited stock, writing, now riddle me this. What sort of soft-headed, beard-gnawing merchants brave goblins, mountains, more goblins, and then those damn elephants to show up with nothing but 1 piece of cheese and 2 rolls of cloth? These merchants, that's who. I noticed one try to eat his own ear coming in. God knows how they're going to get out. Fortunately, they're dumb enough to take some of these useless trinkets in trade. End quote. As winter set in and Tourette Dog began planning
he tried to
a moat
eat his
to
own
defend
ear.
the fort from attack, he recognized that the monkeys milling about in the jungle were more of a threat than initially believed. Quote, these are not cute little chimpanzees. Oh no. These are big mandrills, pissed off and greedy. They feel justified in stealing anything not nailed down, and if they can pry something, for instance a dwarf's arm, loose, it ain't nailed down in their book. End quote. When a pack of mandrills broke into the fort, the dogs that the dwarves had brought with them gave chase, and during this altercation, a peculiar mechanic of Dwarf Fortress came into play. Birthing. Both characters and animals in Dwarf Fortress can become pregnant.
Makes sense.
And the birthing process is an unceremonious affair, with the infant simply dropping out of the mother instantaneously.
Okay.
And this is precisely what happened during the fight. Quote, one of our war dogs went out to fight them off, which didn't go so well. A few more war dogs ran out and attacked. I have to say, I'm slightly terrified by them. One of the bitches actually gave birth while she was attacking, and her puppies joined in on the carnage.
Wow!
At the end of the day, the 3 mandrills were dead, and they took 1 war dog with them and injured another one and a puppy.
Aw.
End quote. With the host finishing a relatively uneventful first year, besides the birthing, the save file was then passed to the next person in line, a forum user by the name of Marijuana, who took to roleplay the fed-up noble.
Can I just say marijuana is a fantastic name. Love it.
Disgusted by the peasants around him. Quote, I came to this dump looking for a royal fortress. Instead, I found this hole in the dirt, complete with useless hillbillies. End quote.
Hey!
Almost immediately,
Why they gotta be hillbillies?
migrants arrived,
Man.
drastically increasing the manual labor force, but also more than doubling food and alcohol consumption, the latter being necessary to prevent the mood of dwarves from sinking. But right as these needs increased, another iconic mechanic of Dwarf Fortress appeared. Fey moods. Occasionally, a dwarf will be overtaken by a bout of vicious inspiration, occupy a workshop, and demand materials for crafting. Should the dwarf's demands be
Who
met,
drew that?
they will
They're pretty
create
good.
a valuable masterwork object.
I'm not great at
but
weapons.
should they lack the materials, they will eventually go mad and often become violent.
And the chain. Damn. Sorry. I miss doing traditional sometimes, which I did a bit with the kiddos, but I need to get back to it, honestly.
Now, a dwarf had taken over the carpenter's shop just as more quarters were becoming necessary. Mercifully, his demands were wood, which was plentiful, and shells, which were easy to acquire in the nearby river.
Could be
Soon,
worse.
The dwarf had created his masterpiece, Vodudib, or, in English, Sound Syrup, a mahogany table.
Sound
Its
syrup?
description read, This is a mahogany table. All craftsdwarfship is of the highest quality. It is encircled with bands of kapok and turtle shell. This object is adorned with hanging rings of mahogany. On the item are images of werewolves in kapok. Frequently, dwarves will create artwork that
That table actually sounds pretty awesome. Sound syrup is a weird name for a table that's engraved with like werewolves, though.
reflects events in the world, including those that occur in the settlement. And while little had happened in Boatmurdered yet, this would very soon change in ways that would be paid homage in horrifying representations, encouraged by the player's mistreatment of the dwarves in their charge, whose extent and consequences would take years to fully elucidate.
I do like the details that you get while playing Dwarf Fortress.
The remainder of the second year in Boatmurdered was marked by death and injury. Due to a lack of accommodations, one of the dwarves fell asleep on the bridge over the underground river, and a surge washed him away and drowned him. The following month, a snake man leapt out from the river and gravely injured a craftsdwarf.
Oh, I
And
think
come
there were some
winter, he would
snakeman
die
issues
of
too.
thirst after refusing food and drink. Another dwarf would be ambushed
I
by a
like
pack of
these little
mandrills
pictures.
just before the year ended. Despite these tragedies, the overall population of Boatmurdered had dramatically
They're really
risen,
cute.
but this number didn't only include dwarves. By this point, there were so many dogs, cats, and horses milling about Boatmurdered that they were clogging the main arteries through the underground passageways, making movement ponderous. Still, by the time Marijuana passed the file to the next person in line, who went by Keyboard Fox, there were plenty of food
Keyboard
stockpiles
Fox
and a
is
serviceable
pretty
amount
good.
of alcohol, though in the words of Keyboard Fox, the dwarves keep drinking it really fast. Whoever's up next should think about making a second still once the immigration wave comes in. The next year was calm, in large part thanks to the installation of numerous traps lining the entrances, but even
I
though
like
he made
the little
swords
notes
for an
to the
eventual
person who
military
comes
to use,
next.
he neglected to actually organize any military, and misfortune continued to plague Boatmurdered. By winter, a miner was injured attempting to set up elephant traps. The second wave of migrants was
Elephant
attacked
traps.
by elephants en route
Oh my
to the settlement,
gosh.
killing 2 and injuring 1. A fire imp slaughtered a carpenter, and a further 4 dwarves were crushed
Wow.
by yet more elephants. What's more, a metalsmith had been taken by a fey mood, but despite striking ore, none of Keyboard Fox's predecessors had established a forge, and despite his best efforts, none could be constructed in time, leading the dwarf to go mad and begin wading upriver, eventually drowning. Still, multiple
Dang.
attacks on the settlement itself were thwarted by the traps, saving no doubt countless dwarves, none of whom were equipped for or experienced with combat. Most of these were cage traps as well, meaning that the animals could be used in trade or tamed. By the end of the year, Keyboard Fox had captured 5 mandrills, a leopard, and over 10 elephants. But
That's
there
a
was
lot of
another major
elephants.
discovery within Boatmurdered that year. A river of magma. Magma in Dwarf Fortress has various uses, including heat for forges, but Keyboard Fox had a different idea in mind. Quote, I am worried about the future of our fortress, namely that the next rulers will not be as security-minded as I am, so I shall flood the chasm with magma/lava and kill all the unnamed horrors within. Beneath this, he included screenshots of the settlement along with brief descriptions. The chasm with its beautiful red line of death. That's the lever you need to remember not to pull, by the way. The magma floodgates link to the lever of doom. I put down some channels just in case someone does pull the lever. End quote. After an uneventful winter, Boatmurdered and its 58 dwarves were passed on to the next player in line, named Locus, who opened his post with a suggestion. Quote, I propose that we each name one dwarf after ourselves when we end our reign and retire/get demoted for gross negligence. I can do that retroactively for previous rulers if you all think it's a good idea. End quote. This idea would prove popular, and soon each previous ruler would have a dwarf named for them. But first, Locus would play his term. Despite the concerns of the previous player, Locus would see to securing the settlement from any threats. Quote, in hostile lands such as these, security and provisions are my first and foremost concerns. Although I was worried when I discovered that we had no military forces to speak of, an inspection of our trap systems revealed that they are sufficient to defeat any attacking force from inside or outside, below a full-scale siege. I looked to wells as a possible route of invading vermin, but only found barrels of alcohol. As we only have a scattering of peasants to choose from, most of which seem to be pursuing their own professions, I will wait for new immigrants to draft for our army. In the meantime, weapons and armor must be forged. End quote. Soon, the expected immigrants arrived. And a guard force and military were organized among them. But Locus quickly ascertained that some of the greatest threats would not come from without, but from within. While perusing the settlement, he beheld a peculiarity. Quote, I am worried about the very unsafe construction of the halls near our magma forges. Rather than leaving occasional natural supports of living stone, the previous ruler has instead dug out the entirety of this wide hallway and built rather unstable-looking stone pillars here. I noticed a small lava flooding space around a pillar blocked by floodgates, which is presumably part of an emergency system to collapse the roof here, but even if a careless or angry dwarf were to dislodge one of them, the consequences would be catastrophic to anyone nearby. End quote. Smaller-scale tragedies would soon strike again in the river rather than the halls. One dwarf would be swept away in the currents, and another struck by a fey mood would go mad for lack of necessary materials and drown himself underneath the bridge. The animals were no luckier. While rearranging the cages, 2 tamed elephants managed to escape, and while not as violent as their feral brethren, fighting still broke out, claiming 2 dogs and an elephant calf. Animals who manage to win enough combat encounters are granted a randomly generated name, and one of the tamed elephants had now gained such, Ikudoltud, which in English means rained-stalked. Locus suggested, quote, I have a theory that once an elephant tastes dwarf blood, which surely is how this particular creature got her name, they cannot be tamed properly. End quote. That autumn, Locus would have the issue of Ikudoltud resolved. After ordering the elephant moved outside, he sicked a dwarven warrior and a swarm of war dogs on her, who managed to swiftly dispatch her without any major injuries. Still, many other elephants awaited in the cages, and their tendencies were no less violent. After another dwarf went mad and retreated from society before dying of thirst, Locus attended to 2 other matters. The first was naming a dwarf for each of the previous rulers. The second was a common feature of Dwarf Fortress succession games, a vanity project. Quote, I have begun construction of a complex of large tombs to hold the remains of the previous rulers of this fort. I have given the smaller tomb to Callow, as he used much of his allotted funds commissioning a statue portrait. Some might say that my own tomb is receiving extra attention, but I believe I am entitled, and if someone else wanted to build a fancy one for themselves, they should have thought of it when they had the chance. Note, to those who intern me to my casket when I pass from this world, please use the provided chains to tether trained mandrills or a suitable substitute to guard my bones from thieves and vandals. P.S. That last part kind of rhymes. I will have it engraved on the door at once. End quote. With this final note, Locus would pass off the settlement to his successor, and it was this player who would at once reveal the absurdity of Boatmurdered and oversee the beginning of its long downslide into its inevitable doom. The 5th overseer for Boatmurdered was a forum user who went by Stark Raving Mad, and his thorough role-playing and liberal usage of screenshots marked him as easily one of the most
shoot, I was muted,
entertaining
I'm sorry.
and thorough. After an introduction,
Couple things I said while I was muted because I didn't realize, was that you shouldn't get attached to dwarfs. I was sad about the one that drowned himself. I don't know if I was muted for that or not. I don't know how long I've been muted. I also pointed out that the one locust, whatever. They had a good point. I mean, yeah, it might seem weird to do that or whatever when nobody else has, but unless they made a rule that you can make a fancy tomb for yourself, then yeah, they should have thought about it themselves. Or they could ask the next person to do it, but then, that person might not have the materials for their own tomb, so, I get it though.
Production that cast himself as a bartender forced into the role of overseer, he began with his assessment of Boatmurdered thus far, referring to his screenshots as drawings to stay in character. Quote, what the fuck? I have to fucking try to get my mind around what I am facing here. To begin with, all of our fucking workshops and trade goods are sitting outside in the fucking rain. One of the previous overseers must have been some sort of shallow-dwelling skygazer, because having our production out here is just inhumane to the poor hoopleheads who have to...
Shallow-dwelling skygazer. That is a fantastic insult for a dwarf. Oh my gosh.
To stand out there. Fuck that. I'm moving everything inside. Oh, and you see all those E's I drew down there at the bottom? Elephants. The previous overseer must have had some sort of sick fucking fascination with them, because we have elephants everywhere. Elephants
That's a
in cages,
lot of elephants.
Elephants in the halls, elephants shitting in the dining room, everywhere. I don't know what to do with them. I guess start butchering them and hope they make a good roast. End quote. Besides the hall, he also noticed something of concern. Quote, room full of levers. I don't know what any of them do, and I'm not going to try and figure it out. With the way this place is set up, any one of them could make the whole place collapse in like an accordion.
Good idea. There is a doom lever. Lever. There is a doom level. Oh, my gosh, I did it again. Lever. So it's a good idea not to go testing them out. I understand the frustration. Like, why would all the workshops be outside in ever-changing weather and more easily attacked as well? Like, why would you do that? Your artisans should be inside.
After addressing other inadequacies, such as the lacking accommodations and inefficient layout, he set the dwarves to work, but the profound problems with Boatmurdered were finally showing to be far more than potential or superficial. Quote, I have 6 fucking carpenters. I asked for this workshop to be built 3 months ago. You think anyone gets around to it? It's a 10-minute job, but they're too busy to do it. Busy doing what? I don't fucking know.
Gathering
Since
elephants!
Without the workshops up, they can't carpenter anything either. I have 4 miners. 2 of them apparently sleep 20 hours a day. 1 is so injured he can't walk, and the last claims to be the retired ruler of this place, but he's the only guy who actually does any digging. End quote. If the dwarves would not...
You know what, though? Let him believe that. Let him believe it. As long as he's working, let him believe it.
complete necessary basic tasks such as these, then it would be nigh impossible to address problems as they arose, nor would it be possible for the dwarves to take the necessary actions to prevent a cascade of events leading to a death spiral. It was at this point that the horrifying events of Boatmurdered would begin to be recorded in its artwork. When dwarves were ordered to decorate the walls of the new dining hall, the dwarf named for Tourette Dog carved one part of the wall with an image of an elephant in the fetal position, and another part of the wall with a representation of a dead dwarf. These carvings would prove not only to be historic, but prophetic, as the first mass death was about to occur, and like most problems
that is pretty
in Dwarf
horrifying.
Fortress, it started small. Quote, We've got a little elephant issue happening down south. I'm starting to understand why the previous owner had 1 million of them in cages. 1 or 2 got pissed, and they killed someone, and now the dwarves are trying to get the items from the guys that died, and the elephants are just running wild over everyone. A couple of the elephants got caught in the remaining cage traps, but 1 or 2 got through. The brave military men of Boatmurdered assemble by the front gate, and...
What I don't understand is, yes, the elephants are a huge problem. I think everyone can agree with that. They were a huge problem. So I do understand, okay, yes, set up traps, hunt the elephants, whatever you gotta do. Use the meat. I don't know if elephant meat is good or not. I will never find out, because elephants are cool. But, like, in this setting, like, why just have them in cages? I'm sure there's so many things that you could use from the elephants. I don't know. I have questions about why they just kept them in the cages, because the cages aren't foolproof. They have escaped and killed people. So yeah.
They braved themselves for a rush at the mighty elephant.
Killed dwarves.
And it was about then when the fucking dwarven caravan arrived. I ordered the military to hold fast. Let the caravan guardsmen get themselves slaughtered by the elephants before we do. Which was also right about when a goblin thief jumped out and got clobbered by a stonefall trap.
I have had goblin
arrived to
thieves
see blood
just
and
shank
vomit everywhere,
people.
us hauling corpses en masse to the graveyard, a couple rampaging elephants. Welcome to fucking Boatmurdered. Hope you like miasma. End quote. Here, miasma refers to the foul odor that bodies emit when they begin decomposing, something that will severely dampen the mood of any dwarf caught in it.
See, that's
After
what I
a war
thought.
dog finally incapacitated
Was that the
rampaging
bodies would have an
elephant,
issue,
even
or
more
cause
elephants
issues.
arrived, irritable and blood-hungry, and the cycle continued, with dwarves meandering outside to gather the items dropped by the slain dwarves, only to be slain in turn, perpetuating the cycle. Even when ordered to cease gathering duties, the dwarves continued to try until approximately 20 stinking dwarf corpses littered the area, after which stark raving mad installed a set of doors and locked them, preventing ingress or egress. Undeterred by the miasma choking the trapped hallways, the elephants continued to loiter outside. But just when the doors were completed, a horde of goblins arrived to lay siege to Boatmurdered. At first, stark raving mad interpreted this as a blessing, as the elephants would presumably fight the goblins, weakening
I get it, yeah. That seems like something that would happen.
Remaining foes. But instead, the two groups seemed to be unbothered by each other's presence, coexisting outside of the locked doors. It was at this point that spring arrived, marking that it was time for the file to be passed to the next player. Stark raving mad.
The goblins employed the elephants. They're working together. Oh no. That's my theory.
Advised them that, quote, the place isn't a total loss, so long as you know, don't open the front door. Good luck no matter what you decide to do with it. End quote. Undeterred, the next person in the queue, named Bremen, took up the mantle of overseer and began plotting
as long as you don't open the front door, that's harsh.
Ballistas. By installing ballistas in the walls, the dwarves could safely fire out from the settlement without opening the doors. But by the time the first one was constructed, the goblins had given up their siege and left entirely, leaving only the elephants, and the military charged out of the doors and struck them down.
That's about right.
Peace finally returned to Boatmurdered. To prepare for another siege, Bremen installed a second ballista. As if to commemorate this victory, a dwarf was taken by a fey mood, and, after finding the necessary materials, crafted a masterwork bracelet depicting a dog killing a mandrill, an elephant making a plaintive gesture before a laughing dwarf, and, somewhat perplexingly, something that the game called a cheese. While food would not be an issue, the alcohol supply would, as Bremen had neglected the plant crops in the spring, leaving the dwarves with no fermentable plants. There was now no alcohol remaining to appease Boatmurdered's workers. Grumpy dwarves will sometimes simply refuse to work, which would only further worsen the fortress's troubles. Troubles amplified by a growing population whose limits would soon be tested by events that seemed too preposterous even by the standards of Dwarf Fortress. As the mood of Boatmurdered's dwarves began to dip, 7 more elephants approached the walls of the fortress.
Oh my.
This new attack came so soon after the previous one that the dwarves have been unable to craft new cages and reset the traps, leaving only 2 armed and prepared. These traps performed their duty, but this still left 5 elephants. Most of the military was either lounging or eating, leaving only 1 dwarf to man the ballistas, killing 2, but it was then that the unbelievable happened. Quote, disaster strikes when a dwarf wanders in and gets killed by an elephant. All the other dwarves, seeing opportunity for new capitalistic riches, begin to rush towards the body to grab his valuable equipment. Remembering the stories I heard about my predecessor, I hurriedly ordered the outer door to be locked, but the door is stuck open. Sabotage.
Oh,
elephant
gosh.
Sympathizer, that traitor, that
elephant sympathizer.
Monarch butterfly? Apparently, showing incredible coordination, a monarch butterfly flew into the door workings just before the time of the attack and jammed it open. With all the bodies and items left by the elephants, no one is doing such a low-priority task as cleaning up bug remains.
No.
Meanwhile, the ballista operators, seeing the riches beyond their carved fortifications, gleefully follow the crowd out the main door and into the elephant-choked tunnel. Assigning more dwarves to operate the ballistas depletes the remaining supply of arrows without effect. My Mark's dwarves run out of bolts, but there are still 2 elephants remaining. There's only 1 chance left. I activate the entire military and send them in a massed charge at the elephants. The recruits, minus all those drinking, eating, and sleeping, let out a mighty shout and charge. For the glory of Boatmurdered. No one can fault their bravery, only their results. End quote.
Oh, I don't
With
like
the
that.
military failing, Bremen fell back on a piece of engineering created by one of his predecessors that had, until now, gone unused. With all of the elephants still outside, Bremen pulled one of the levers which withdrew a drawbridge. As there were no longer any bolts remaining in the fortress, Bremen set his dwarves to making more, and the moment that each was constructed, it was fired at the elephants outside, eventually injuring them enough for them to exsanguinate. Within a month, another herd of elephants
That
approached,
seems like a
and the
horrible way to
response
die.
from the dwarves of Boatmurdered was less than swift. Quote, I wondered why no dwarf has put up the doors yet, or even cleared the equipment and refuse from the area. A quick inspection finds the problem. The huge number of tame animals, combined with the narrow corridors, is causing a truly horrible traffic
Oh my
jam.
gosh,
I ordered
no.
the corridors widened and as many animals as possible put into cages. Luckily, the elephant herd turns south and skips the fortress entirely. With the corridors beginning to be passable again, a dwarf manages to construct the door, blocking off the elephants forever. End quote. Boatmurdered had just been saved by a stroke of luck.
Yeah,
With
that was a
another
lot of
Fey
luck.
mood taking a dwarf, a marble amulet was made to commemorate the events of the last year.
Like,
2 of the 4 scenes depicted were of an elephant striking down a dwarf. Stark Raving
ouch.
Mad, whose turn was finished but was still watching the thread, wrote sarcastically, quote, Here, I've made an amulet of all the history I know. Look, it's an elephant slaughtering dwarves by the hundreds. You can really see the bones and gristle. If you check the back, there's a lovely rendering of a butterfly jamming the fortress doors open. Also, more elephants killing dwarves.
Oh
End
gosh.
quote. Soon after this, a child would be taken by a Fey mood as well and make a piece of art, also depicting an elephant slaughtering a dwarf. In response to Stark
Gosh,
Raving
that's
Mad
terrible.
noting that most of the previous rulers had died during his turn, Bremen replied, quote, I ran out of coffins. Then I ran out of designated graveyard space. Most of you are spending your eternal rest in the garbage dump.
Oh,
While the installation of doors could prevent
harsh.
the rampaging elephants from entering and prevent the dwarves from leaving in an emergency, fortifications could not protect any traders in transit. That autumn, just as a herd of elephants was loitering on the road into Boatmurdered, the yearly dwarven trade caravan arrived and ran directly into the elephants, who immediately became irate and attacked, leaving
Not a
only one
surprise?
guard alive. During the quiet winter, Bremen revitalized the military both by increasing its size and having them train in crossbow shooting so that the elephants could be assaulted from within the walls.
Good
But the
idea.
following year would see a piece of engineering created that would theoretically make the military obsolete. Stark Raving Mad had begun its construction, but had given up when encountering difficulties. The next ruler, however, possessed the knowledge to see it completed. Taking on the
What?
responsibility of overseer, forum user Senkus started the year relatively quietly, and using this merciful period, he ordered his mining dwarves to carve out a long channel along the northern side of the fortress, leading from the flowing magma to the outer wall of the mountain.
Oh.
The plan was simple and destructive in the extreme.
Oh
If ever a
no.
threat posed itself outside, the doors would be closed, the lever would be pulled, and magma would flow out of the fortress and flood the outside, burning anything caught in its tide. This, however, wouldn't fix the ever-mounting problem of dwarves being unable to complete basic tasks within the fortress, including the moving of dead bodies, and
I can see the lava thing going so wrong. Oh my
the
gosh.
miasma from the corpses of fallen animals
Maybe I
and
hadn't heard of this
dwarves
one before.
was beginning to fill the hallways.
Seth's might have
Other
just been his
tasks,
own
such as
playthrough.
mining, required significant effort to make certain that they were done, if they were done at all. Despite the relatively swift completion of the magma canal, no major attacks would occur, only a small raid by mandrills. Rather, a different threat would face Boatmurdered, one that threatened to end the fortress unless swift and extreme action was taken. as the final months of Sankis's playthrough were drawing to a close, a rush of water appeared from the north, inundating the fields and forest.
Oh,
Apparently,
that's no
one
good.
of the dwarves assigned to digging out the terrain had struck a hidden source of water or carved out the bank of the river, and now this water was flowing unabated, washing away the miner and stranding the other dwarves who were left outside. Desperately, Sankis closed the doors to block the water from flowing into the fortress, but now the dwarves of Boatmurdered were stuck inside
Yeah.
with nowhere to put the rotting corpses. With alcohol supplies dwindling and no other recourse availing him, Sankis took the only action that he could think to take. He ordered the lever pulled.
Oh my
Gradually,
gosh.
magma
Ah,
began seeping
what's gonna
through
happen?
the channel, and once it reached the opening, it spilled out into the overworld, rapidly evaporating the water into steam as it continued to flow into the forest. Unable to escape, many of the stranded dwarves were scalded to death by the hot steam, and
I was
those
gonna
who
say, what
escaped
happened
the
to those
steam were instead
dwarves?
burned in the lava. The dogs who happened to be with them fared no better.
Aw.
One of the forum members reading the thread asked, "Did it solve the elephant problem at least?" Sankis replied using 2 screenshots. The first showed a herd of 7 elephants standing in the water with steam and lava approaching them from both sides. The second showed only the river surrounded by scorched earth. Beneath these screenshots,
Sheesh.
he wrote the words, "You tell me." Before ending his turn, Sankis named a dwarf after himself and had him decorate his tomb. The first etching, named The Old Stick of Balls, was a rendition of a burning dog, while the second, The Silvery
Wow.
Crystalline Dumpling, depicted a screaming dwarf. With these constructed, Boatmurdered
That's
and its
awful.
91 dwarves were then left in the hands of the next player. But before this new player could take his turn, Stark Raving Mad returned for an interlude. Dwarf Fortress was not meant to be the next major project for Bay 12 Games. Before Dwarf Fortress, they had intended to produce an adventure game, with Dwarf Fortress as a side project, but the
I think
latter
I-
gradually became the game that
I'm pretty
most
sure I heard
interested
that
the brothers and
before.
their small cadre of fans, and so it became their focus.
But like, it's a good game. Like they put so much thought into it's good.
However, their love for adventure games was still present, and so they added a special feature called Adventurer Mode to Dwarf Fortress, which allowed
Oh.
players to explore their randomly generated world, and included in this world would be any player-made fortresses as well,
Oh, that's
available
interesting.
to explore and containing art and artifacts made by the dwarves of that fortress. While the main game mode would only reveal the most basic information about any crafted art pieces, Dwarf Fortress still kept track of who or what was depicted, and Adventurer Mode allowed the player to see this within the game. Retrieving the updated files for Boatmurdered, Stark Raving Mad began a quest to delve
I
into
don't
the
blame him.
settlement and see what he could find. One of the easiest ways to improve the value of a fortress is to engrave the walls and floor, given that it can be done quickly and at no cost in resources, and so there were many waiting there. Stark shared a handful of engravings, each depicting the wholesale slaughter of dwarves by the numerous elephants who assailed Boatmurdered, adding, quote,
There
"These are just a representative sample.
There
There
was
are
so
dozens
much.
and dozens of engravings of dwarves
There's
being
so
struck
much
down
elephant
by
murder.
a seemingly endless herd of legendary named elephants. The slaughter must have been unimaginable. I cannot conceive of what they must have done to engender this much hatred from the elephants. It seems they did fight back and eventually triumph against the elephants, however." End quote. Among other, more mundane occurrences documented on the walls and floor, the releasing of the lava flow was also recorded through the horrific deaths of the dwarves and dogs caught in it. With these discoveries,
Sheesh.
Stark concluded his exploration, and the forum thread returned to the Succession game. The next person to complete a turn in Boatmurdered, who went by Unknowing, would begin more ambitious projects for the fortress. the most dangerous of which was strip mining the as yet unexplored area beyond the river of magma within the mountain. The magma itself was little impediment, crossed easily by a bridge, but the enemies that could be found
fair, I guess.
deeper in the mountain would pose a significant threat, and with an
What are
entire
they?
military
I wanna
squad
know.
wiped out when the lava flow was released, the dwarves available to fight against these threats were limited. This danger would prove to be far more than hypothetical. The moment that the miners dug too deep, they were set upon by horrible tentacle demons and quickly slain. And once they were finished, the demons moved
Tentacle
on to assail the
demons.
rest of the fortress. While the military was in a
That's good.
severely weakened state, the guard force was still present and prepared, and after approximately 24 dwarves were slain, representing a quarter of the population of Boatmurdered, the demons were finally stopped for good. But only 5 days after the demons were let loose onto the fortress, a goblin attack occurred. The ensuing fight would last for days, but finally, the goblins were all slain by the military and guards.
That's a
with only
lot of
handful
goblins.
of dwarven casualties. With
Holy
this,
cow.
the fortress was passed to the next player, named Cross Quantum. Where other rulers would typically inspect the integrity of the fortress, Cross Quantum first took the time to appreciate the various works of art, and among the many recordings of elephants killing dwarves, there was another common representation that could be seen. Many of them were a rendition of a well-designed image of a cheese. Remarking
Why
on
are
this,
there so
Cross
many
Quantum
images
wrote,
of cheese?
quote, "Apparently the two most significant historical events here in Boatmurdered are elephants and cheese. Take a close look at the cheese ones, actually. They aren't even carvings of cheese, but renditions of some other image of a cheese. They're freaking homages."
That's
Interested, I
crazy.
investigated the art history of the settlement further. I discovered this artifact, which I can only presume was the inspiration for all the imitators. Having viewed it for myself, I must agree that this image of a cheese speaks to the dwarven spirit and will be a cultural treasure for generations to come. End quote. Spring was quiet, but as summer arrived, a force of
I mean, it must have
goblins
been,
did as well. It was now that the willingness of
crazy.
the administrators of Boatmurdered to use the magma channel became
cheese was
apparent.
very important
as
to them.
Cross
You know
Quantum's
what though? Same. I love some cheese. Cheese is awesome.
response was simply to close the doors, pull the lever,
Cheese and
let
potatoes.
lava spill out over the land. Soon after,
Oh,
frogmen
gosh.
leapt from the river but were swiftly
Oh,
dispatched by
man.
the guard force. 3 months later, another goblin siege arrived, and it was handled in the exact same way as the previous siege, by pulling the lever and releasing lava into the outside world, utterly consuming the goblins and what scarce plant life had returned. Boatmurdered was now more secure than it
You
had
need
ever
plant
been,
life. You need to
but
be able
this
to
did
eat
not mean that life
vegetables
there
and
was
stuff
at all pleasant.
and make
Cross
booze.
Quantum summarized his interpretation of life at Boatmurdered. Quote, "Diary, I'm starting to hate it here. It seems that every other day there's some new invading force of some kind or another. There's blood all over the main hallway now. Where does it all come from? Butterflies that stink with the stench of 1,000 corpses, and the screams of possessed
question.
dwarves echo through the halls."
Oh, my nose.
End quote. That winter, a kobold raid arrived, but just as quickly turned around and left. Cross Quantum lamented, quote, "Come on, guys, we have a nice settlement. Why didn't you stick around? Was it the ashen wasteland? The blood-stained gates? Was it the screams of madmen or the stench of death? We've got awful nice engravings of some fucking cheese here. Come the fuck on in." End quote.
I mean, the
With winter coming
blood-stained
to a
door
close, and with it the
gates
end
could
of
be enough.
Boatmurdered's 10th year, the next person in line was unable to
10
finish their turn, and
years.
so another person took the save file and began a new thread, meaning that players who had already taken a turn could play again. The new thread maker, Mystic Mongol, would claim the next year for himself, opening with a summary
That
of
art's so
Boatmurdered
good.
and its population of 63 dwarves, down from 91 just 2 years prior. The military now numbered only 5.
Ooh,
noted,
that's rough.
Food supplies were good for a fortress of this size, although the low population count worried me. Earlier reports had implied at least 100 dwarves lived in Boatmurdered. Indeed, there were many vacant bedrooms in the projects near the
I bet there
entrance,
were.
most of which were not properly licensed and zoned for dwarven inhabitants. I corrected this oversight immediately. End quote.
Perfect.
This line implies a potentially massive error from one of the previous rulers. One of the major amenities that dwarves require is a bedroom with basic furniture, but simply carving out a room and placing the furniture is not enough. The space must be zoned for the purpose before a dwarf can claim it. Unzoned bedrooms would be an easy mistake to miss by later rulers, meaning that many dwarves could have been homeless for years, severely dampening their mood, and dwarves also have a tendency to ruminate upon both negative and positive events, which will worsen or improve a dwarf's mood long after the event has occurred. Still,
Makes
the
a lot
fact
of
that this
sense.
was now being addressed gave Boatmurdered some glimmer of hope. But this was far from the only problem that Mystic Mongol identified. Besides the lacking military, crime was rampant and unpunished in the fortress, and the bookkeeper had long since died with nobody to replace him, along with many of the other functionaries. However, many nobles still remained, and most of them were displeased. Nobles are a special class in Dwarf Fortress with special demands, many requiring higher value accommodations to remain satisfied, and while quite a few valuable treasures have been produced in Boatmurdered, few if any were assigned to them. With little precious metal being extracted from the mountain due to the numerous systemic problems, it would be difficult to provide.
I am really glad that they came out with the more artistic version of this. And even then, there's so much information. It's a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. There's just so much information. It's so easy. It would be so easy to just completely botch a playthrough.
Provide the nobles with what they demanded. What's more, their quarters were significantly beneath sufficient, even if there were enough fine goods. Role-playing as one of the nobles, Mystic wrote, quote, I was quite unhappy to find out my 3 royal rooms were in fact 1 room. I was further angered to find out my bedroom/dining room/study was shared with all of the house representatives, the mayor, the handler, almost all of the nobles were crammed into a single room. Confusingly, they didn't seem to mind or notice. Once my initial rage died down, I assigned the remaining homeless nobles to the room. No reason they couldn't crash on my Dolomite couch. Still, I decided to spend some time making individual housing for at least a few of them. End quote. Much like the other rulers, Mystic took the time to inspect some of the artwork around Boatmurdered, and he chose a representative assortment of engravings, including a dwarf in the fetal position, a burning dwarf, a dwarf being shot with an arrow by a goblin, a screaming elephant, burning dwarf, and one of the tentacle demons who had slain so much of Boatmurdered's population. The fortress's currency also sported a tentacle demon on its back.
I mean, it makes sense.
With the fortress in such extreme disarray, it would take untold effort to put things right, and as Mystic Mongol began, it was difficult to say whether or not it was possible to rescue Boatmurdered. Still, there was nothing to do but try. The remainder of the year was quiet for Mystic Mongol, who busied himself with tidying the fortress in various ways, including ensuring that the nobles had individual quarters, each sufficiently decorated with valuables produced from new metal and jewels mined out of the mountain. A makeshift militia was also created by equipping the craft
Things seem like they're improving.
The efforts of Mystic Mongol were less appreciated by Senkus, who was now taking his second term. First, in the spring, a massive force including dozens of goblins arrived, and just like the other attacks, the entrances were barricaded and the lever pulled to burn the entire invasion. Shortly afterward, another threat arrived, a bronze colossus named Lolum Romantic Day. This colossus, despite being a fearsome foe, was handled in much the same way as every other threat, with molten rock. To take revenge on Mystic for locking away the dwarf named for him, Senkus had an elephant released to attack Mystic's dwarf, but he managed to escape with only a broken leg before the elephant was caught in a trap. Mystic was nonplussed by this transgression. Quote, Yo man, what? I didn't actively hurt you. You committed a crime and you feel the need to sick an elephant on me after stripping me of my weapons?
I get it.
Uncool,
Like,
dude.
that is pretty uncool. Mystic was just trying to make things better, and he seemed to be doing so. Sankus knows he's wrong.
Sankus minimized
Or
the
she.
threat that the elephant posed to
I guess we don't
Mystic's
know.
dwarf by pointing out the high-quality armor that he was wearing, and also noting that, because he had been unarmed by his own choice, he had gained 4 levels in wrestling.
Oh.
He also noted that
That's
he
a lot
wouldn't
of
have done
wrestling.
so in the first place if Mystic's dwarf was not a noble. Indeed, due to the frequent deaths in Boatmurdered, the number of nobles in relation to the working dwarves was quickly becoming skewed. An immigration
imagine
rate,
it
while
is.
smaller than it otherwise would have been, consisted almost entirely of nobles, further increasing the
worker
chance
dwarves
of demands
keep
that
dying.
the fortress could not meet. While conditions were improving, the history of the fortress would still be remembered in its artwork, including the masterpieces produced by Fey Moods. To help prevent such tragedies from occurring again, Sankus constructed a moat which could be activated with the
A
pull
moat's
of a
not a
lever.
bad idea.
Still,
That is actually a fantastic idea. Moats existed for a reason. So building a moat as a defensive strategy rather than constantly flooding the area with lava, that's smart. That's a great idea. I might make it wider than that, but yeah.
few small-scale attacks were repelled by the military alone, and hope was beginning to return. Perhaps, if things continued in such a way, Boatmurdered could potentially survive. But a brief glance at the population demographics showed just how far Boatmurdered was from
It's
attaining
bad.
any sort of stability.
It's
The
so bad.
population
There's
had
only
dipped
2
from
kids.
over 100 to 61 over the course of just a few years, and a third of those remaining dwarves were nobles.
And there aren't
leaving
any
only about
peasants.
40 dwarves with skills related to labor, a distressingly low number for a fortress of Boatmurdered's age.
That's
With the
bad.
year closed out,
So bad.
administration of the fort passed to a new forum member. This
Oh
one
my
named
gosh.
Dr. Zero, and his keenness to roleplay helped to reveal just how badly the fort had fallen into disrepair. Quote, "The winter snows had receded already down here, and the scene was horrendous. The earth, the trees, the very rock face of the mountain was scorched and burnt. Feeble plants poked through the ash and soot in between the piles of what was this? I
Oh.
moved off the paved road to investigate
Oh,
piles and piles
gosh.
of armor and weapons, laying around as if their diminutive owners simply crumbled to ash. Dogs and cats picked through the debris, hunting small vermin. I turned to look back. Perhaps I could make the journey back to Kinmelville before... No, it was too late. I was being hailed by a dwarf in rags and tatters. The dwarf
Wow.
hailing me was Olin, the broker. His once noble
Wow, that's just
pigtail
awful.
clothes hang in scraps from his limbs, standing in pools of dried vomit." End quote. Here, Dr. Zero pointed out a horrendous oversight made by the previous rulers. As time passes in Dwarf Fortress, the clothing of dwarves wears through, and new clothes must be made by either
Oh,
buying cloth
no.
or making it from plants, and dwarves wearing worn clothing will be significantly less happy.
And if they keep burning stuff, then they probably don't have the plants necessary to be able to make oh my gosh.
At some point, the creation of new clothing had ceased in Boatmurdered. It was possible that it had never begun at all.
That's
This would
so
need to be
bad. Oh my
rectified
gosh.
as soon as possible. With the food supplies buoyed only by slaughtering many of the tamed elephants in the fortress, Dr. Zero set to work planting new
I
crops
do like the
as well.
roleplay aspects
Along
of this
with
though.
these issues, he noticed
it's
that
great.
many of the dwarves were idle, with no work orders to fulfill. Again, how long the fortress had been in this state was difficult to ascertain. The various engineering projects had also been poorly recorded. When Dr. Zero began pulling levers in an attempt to discover which one would water the soil
Oh,
intended
no.
for crops, one of them opened a valve that spilled water into the siege workshop,
Oh,
soaking
no.
everyone inside. Why this existed in the first place was a mystery, though it was likely the leftovers from an unfinished project. The proportion of dissatisfied nobles, however, was beginning to directly interfere
That's
with
so
work
bad.
in the fortress. When the jeweler was unable to keep up with the demands of so many nobles, and often lacking the materials necessary to meet those demands, she was thrown in prison, further slowing Boatmurdered's production. What's more, a new immigration wave of 9 dwarves arrived, a third of which were nobles, doing nothing
my
to fix
gosh!
the demographic imbalance.
There's
This
so
was
many
made slightly
nobles.
worse when the arriving baron's consort gave birth, to which Dr. Zero reacted by writing, "Just what we need. More noble larvae." Still, the rest of the year was quiet,
No!
and Dr. Zero did his best to set up
Not
the next
larva!
ruler to be able to mine out more metals and
Ugh.
gems. Despite the hopeful epilogue to the
Look how
13th
extensive
year,
that
the
is.
next person to take control would make clear his belief to the
Sheesh.
contrary immediately, that there was nearly no hope for Boatmurdered to escape its imminent doom.
I mean, is he wrong though? Is he wrong?
For the 14th year, Marijuana returned, and his assessment of the fortress was immediately dismal.
I love that name so
Quote,
much.
"There are so many problems with Boatmurdered that I don't even know how to begin reversing the cycle of decay. The first thing I noticed was the smell, and I don't know what to say about it. It's like an elephant's ass. Then I saw the bones and the rotting pieces of flesh that
Yeah.
children kick around in the streets, and the
Oh my
nightmare
gosh.
scenes carved into the walls of dwarves and animals screaming, of monsters gorging upon children in lumps, and things I
Sheesh.
never want to speak of. It's as if the dwarves of Boatmurdered have lost all
They
hope.
probably
I don't know
have.
what to do for these people, or if indeed there is anything that can be done for them. For now, I have ordered them to move these piles of goblin equipment to the magma river to be melted.
I mean,
By the gods, how many legions of goblins have died before the gates of Boatmurdered?"
a lot.
End quote. Despite ordering them moved,
I think the answer to that is yes.
the goblin armor lay outside untouched, their former owners burnt away in the lava. Any production in Boatmurdered was quickly becoming paralyzed. Marijuana was further frustrated by the demands of the newly arrived elven diplomat, who ordered that the fortress limit the number of trees that it would cut down. After tentatively agreeing to the demands, he immediately came to regret his acquiescence, and he sicked the small military on the elven merchants, stealing everything that they had brought with them.
I mean,
Then,
fair.
he ordered the dwarves out into the forest to cut down the trees that had stood beyond the reach of the lava flows. But like nearly everything
Like,
in
why would you
Boatmurdered,
agree?
there was a
Agree to
complication.
that?
Quote, "Diary, I regret to write that our deforesters are having difficulties. Some of the men are allergic to the sun and can only walk so far before they become sickly and crawl back toward the fort,
Allergic to the
leaving
sun.
trails
Oh, okay, that's a new one. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use that. Let's go here. Let's go to the beach. Nah, I'm allergic to the sun. I love it.
of vomit in their wake. Other
Not for the
dwarves were
dwarves.
ambushed
It's
by
just
elephants
the
in
idea is
southern
funny.
parts of the forest where the
As an
magma could not
excuse.
reach. It goes without saying that the casualties were high. 2 dwarves died, and others were wounded and had to be dragged back to camp. I have ordered the men to leave Elephant Grove alone, at least for the time being." End quote. The person who was next slated to take
That
control
sucks,
of
but it makes
Boatmurdered
sense.
was watching and lamented, "Oh God, you slaughtered the merchants and are going to leave me to deal with the invasion?" But this slaughter was not enough
Oh,
to save Marijuana.
That's a good
With the
point.
elephants to the south guarding the remaining trees, he built a bridge so that the lava could reach the far side of the river and the grove. And once this bridge was completed, he ordered the lever pulled.
No!
However, as soon as the lava spilled out into the field, the human trading caravan arrived,
Oh my
and they were
gosh.
completely engulfed in the flow, burning them all to death,
Oh,
along with
no!
their wagons full of goods.
would
Lamenting
you
this
do
tragedy,
that?
Marijuana took solace by watching the lava continue to flow south towards the Elephant Grove, but despite the presence of the bridge, the lava would not pass over it. Mystic Mongol, who was still watching the thread, elucidated the problem. Quote, "You need an aqueduct. The aqueduct needs to be made of stone. You just murdered dozens of our best trading partners, you bastard."
Yeah,
End quote.
that's awful.
After waiting for the lava to dissipate, Marijuana built an aqueduct and again released the flow, this time engulfing the grove and the elephants along with it. Now, all that remained of the approach to Boatmurdered was
Sheesh.
a vast, burnt hellscape. Inside the fortress, conditions were not
Why are they okay? They are making reverse dwarven Isengard. With lava instead of just deforestation. Oh my gosh. Why?
much better. Depressed dwarves continued to mill about the halls, while
My
others
gosh.
went mad for lack of materials demanded by their fey moods. The dwarf named for Sankis continued to produce high-quality carvings in the walls and floor, at least one of which was now of the human caravan burning in the lava. With little hope for the future, Marijuana made
Ouch.
the decision to build a monument to himself in the form of a large lizard, demanding that nearly
fair.
every dwarf be assigned to the task. While they were constructing it, however, another goblin siege appeared.
Oh my
and while
gosh,
he
look at the
didn't know it
goblins.
yet, this was the siege that would set off a chain reaction of events that would finally bring about the long-predicted end of Boatmurdered.
Might as well go out making a monument. Might as well.
Just like with every other goblin siege, Marijuana performed the routine releasing
Oh,
of
how many
molten
people
rock
did he
into
kill?
the world
How
to
many
burn
dwarves
away
did he
the
kill?
goblins. But this time, there were two unexpected effects. First, the lava damaged the artwork that Sankis the dwarf had inscribed on the monument outside. Such a transgression sent him into a tantrum.
Oh no.
Second, the lava was able to make its
Oh,
way to
no.
a wooden catapult, lighting it on fire. Smoke began billowing out from it, flooding not only the outside, but the hallways and rooms of Boatmurdered with smoke.
Oh.
Somehow, Sankis found himself suddenly on fire, and this catapulted his tantrum into a violent, frothing rage,
You know-
which he then
You know what? You know what? I ain't even mad at him. I would probably go into a violent frothing rage if I was on fire.
directed towards any living thing near
I
him.
mean, honestly.
After attacking a young dwarf and a cow, he turned his attention to a Marks dwarf, whom he pinned and began beating for so
Oh,
long
no.
that the Marks dwarf also caught fire and died shortly after
Oh my
Sankis succumbed to the
gosh.
flames. The other dwarves would soon follow suit, given their limited accommodations, tattered clothing, unstable
Hold on.
food and drink supply.
I saw
and
E's in
ability
there.
to
Were there
meet nobles'
elephants?
demands.
Were there elephants in the fortress?
Constant death, and a nearly endless list of other indignities, this smoke was enough to send many of the dwarves into a tantrum as well, and
I
they began
bet.
flailing at the dwarves around them. The death of nearby dwarves sent even more dwarves into violent
Oh
fits,
my
and
gosh.
they began turning on one another just in time
Hey, Zoodle,
for a
how's it
horde
going?
of mandrills to attack under the cover of smoke. Quote, "The carnage did not stop with the death of Sankis. More and more dwarves are tantruming, and fighting
Sheesh.
is near constant in the streets. There are only 5 nobles left alive now. Why? Because nobles are goddamn weak. If you've got to bet on 10 tantruming nobles or a goddamn swordmaster, the choice is clear."
I mean,
End
yeah,
quote.
fair.
This chain reaction continued for 3 weeks straight. Quote,
Aww.
"No matter what I do, they just won't stop dying. There are now 39 living dwarves in Boatmurdered, of
Sheesh.
whom 10 are injured, 2 are jailed, and several are insane.
Why are
At
the
least
insane
smoke
ones
and
not also
miasma
jailed?
make it difficult to see the burning bodies and pools of blood mixed into vomit." When Sankis asked what had caused the uproar, Marijuana replied, "It's the smoke. There is a permanent cloud of it, driving everybody mad. It makes everybody just an inch from snapping.
I
so
need
if the
to,
tiniest little thing
I need to make some more emotes so that there's some free ones that you can use without having to subscribe. Right now, all I have are the paid ones. But I do have an option to do free ones. Just give me time to recover, and I'll try and make a couple. Or maybe move some of the paid ones down to free and make some new paid ones. We'll see. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're doing
someone
well.
is going to go berserk. And when that berserk dwarf kills another dwarf's baby, the father goes berserk
Oh
and
my
kills
gosh.
a cow. And that...
Oh my gosh. Why didn't the father kill the dwarf that killed his baby? What? Why did he kill a cow? I mean, I can't promise that if I had a baby and somebody killed the baby that I wouldn't go after that person and then also go kill a cow. I can't promise that I wouldn't do that. But it would be both of them. They would both be listed. I'm doing all right, thank you. I ended up not streaming Tuesday. I think I forgot to explain why. Because of a couple of ladies that volunteered at my old job or they came out. We went to breakfast, we hung out a little bit, went to a couple of stores in my town. And I thought I might have a start late, but by the time I got back, it's like there's no point. I'd only be able to stream for like an hour, so I'm gonna go to sleep, and I took a nap. I mean, maybe, but not until after I killed whoever killed my baby. I don't endorse killing anybody. This is in the context of a video game.
That causes the cow lady to go mad and break the well, and so on until
How do you
everybody
break
is
a
mad.
well? Oh
Even
wait, no, I
now,
know how you would
dwarves on
break
the
a well.
sick
Never
beds
mind.
of the barracks are beginning to rip each other apart. End quote.
Eat the cow.
When
I mean,
Marijuana attempted to order the gates closed to end the constant
cow
stream
meat
of
is
smoke
good.
into the fortress, the few remaining obedient dwarves found themselves unable because a burning corpse was blocking the path to the lever.
Gosh.
Desperate to complete one worthwhile thing during his turn, Marijuana ordered every remaining dwarf to continue construction on the monument. As his turn came to a close, he wrote, quote, "At last the smoke is rising, and the cycle of death in Boatmurdered is coming to an end. The population of the fortress seems to have stabilized at 27 dwarves, with the last death occurring a little over 2 weeks ago.
That's
Happy
rough.
fucking New Year's, you poor bastards.
There's still like 2
Almost
kids.
everyone in Boatmurdered is dead. Those who aren't are either insane or hopelessly overworked. My
Aw.
condolences to whoever governs Boatmurdered next, because you
Those
have
poor
your work
dwarves.
cut out for you. Just how bad is fucking Boatmurdered doing? Take a look." End quote. Beneath this was a screenshot of the summary of Boatmurdered. Just as he indicated, only 27 dwarves remained, just 2 of whom were nobles. What's more, while there was a large food stockpile, the fortress was completely dry, with no drink to be found. He concluded by writing, quote, "And my monument?
That's bad.
Yeah, I finished it. I meant to make half a goddamn lizard, and nobody will say otherwise if they know what's good for them." End quote. Soon after the file was passed to the next person in line, named Gorilla Medic, another immigrant wave arrived, consisting entirely of 20 nobles. Nobles now outnumbered working dwarves 22 to 16. Then, in a sudden resumption of carnage, somehow, dwarves began lighting themselves on fire, their charred corpses littering the floor. Miasma filled the halls of Boatmurdered, concealing the carnage. This fire spread again and again until one of the final 5 dwarves slew 2 others, then wandered into the fire. Finally, and suddenly, in midsummer, there were only 2 dwarves remaining, an elite and well-equipped swords dwarf and a lone child. It was at this point that Gorilla Medic declared Boatmurdered finished. To commemorate
Yeah.
its ending, another forum user, Evil Slug,
Evil
wrote what
Slug,
would come to be
gosh.
known as the finale. Quote, "The fortress of Boatmurdered burns, without and within. All is smoke and fire. Everybody is dead, save two. I ask you to picture a lone, abandoned child and the well-known madman, Gorilla Burial Gears, outside the heavily
my
decorated
gosh.
mountainside entrance. The child plays in a bone pile,
That's
simple-minded and
depressing.
happy. She seems oblivious to the death and decay that surrounds her on all sides. Once a
That would be pretty typical for children, though. So, not really fully understanding. I appreciate that it's being depicted that way.
celebrated hero, Gorilla Burial Gears has found himself helpless as this idiot child when he was needed the most. The would-be ruler silently mourns for the poor child's future, while he knowingly and selfishly prepares
No!
to leave her behind.
No, that's
As
awful.
he pulls on his pack and begins searching for the road, the girl
I
suddenly
do not
yells,
endorse cannibalism.
"Shiny!" and thrusts a pebble toward him. Gorilla reaches out to take the smooth stone and rubs it thoughtfully between his fingers while returning an empty smile. The girl quickly goes back to her bones, and he takes the opportunity to leave. This is all he knows to
I
do.
still don't endorse it.
Killing her
The
would be a service.
World of Warcraft trolls are an exception because they are cannibals.
But his swords seem too heavy for the task.
But I still don't think they eat
Or is
kids.
it his heart? He once more rubs the stone and decides this is how it must be. He simply cannot kill her. One of the
Aw.
greatest dwarven warriors to ever live, unable to kill a child. He would find it pathetic and laughable were he still sane. Alas, his very soul is broken, along
I'm
with
glad
his
he
mind.
can't.
The famed dwarven warrior now finds himself too emotionally weary to do more than mindlessly
killing
pilot
kids.
his body towards safer fields or a pitiful and uncelebrated death. After a bit of searching, Burial Gears finds the outline of the main road and begins to follow it towards civilization.
There's
The
only a few minutes left
coherent
in this
thought
one.
he can seem to muster will ultimately become his mantra and his sole reason for continued life in the early months of his upcoming journey. Any place is better. I must press on. I ask that you picture this dwarven champion pausing briefly atop the last ash-encrusted ridge in the distance.
Did he
In
leave
the
the kid
waning
there?
light of a setting sun, he looks back upon the gaping, smoking maw of Hell's Door one last time. At this moment, he finally sees Boatmurdered for what it truly is, a wicked and foreboding blight upon the surrounding lands. The windswept and charred landscape robs him of any tears he might have produced. All are dead at Boatmurdered, the best dwarves he has ever known, gone. In his mind, the blood of the dozens he could not save will eternally stain his hands.
So,
in his head, he will forever hear the screams of the dead as they burned or murdered one another in the last days of the once proud fortress. Gorilla Burial Gears absently tucks the child's rock into his pack and turns to leave for good, his head hung low. His words trail behind him as he disappears over the ridge. It is a haunting whisper, quickly stolen away by the wind. All burn. And then he is gone. High atop the cliff,
I
a
really
lone
appreciate.
child waves goodbye and chases her gesture.
I really, really, really appreciate the thought that went into like these writings. This is really well done. I don't necessarily appreciate the emojis scattered throughout the writings, but I'm sure it's the culture of the site that it's on, so that's fine. You know, you follow whatever the culture is for the site. So that's fine. I just the thought that went into the writing itself, though, Like, holy cow.
with the kind of carefree laughter only youth can enjoy. She then returns to her game with a pair of pretty stones, almost immediately forgetting about the nice dwarf in the shiny suit. This unfortunate young girl will come to be known in legend
really,
as
like,
Dodoc Saber Frenzy's
well done.
last survivor of Boatmurdered.
For, like,
In all cultures,
this is so well done for an RP forum post about Dwarf Fortress. Like,
both name
I
and
appreciate it. I can
place
appreciate
will
it.
come to elicit
Just like I
hushed
can appreciate
tones
the art
and
that was drawn
ultimately
and
grow to be synonymous with
I
the
love it.
doom of the very soul itself. End quote. While the fall of Boatmurdered was final, its legacy would live
that's a
on
wow
long
dwarf.
after its collapse. Other popular games would pay homage to it
Oh!
by naming characters.
Oh my gosh! I gotta find Boatmurdered and WoW now.
Or weapons after certain aspects of the fallen fortress, and when the game finally received a release on Steam with enhanced graphics and music, one of the tracks would be named after it, Koganu-san,
Oh.
the dwarven word for Boatmurdered, in which the vocalists solemnly sing the name with no other lyrics. This song plays whenever a fortress finally falls in anyone's game, ensuring that the legacy and extraordinary failure of Boatmurdered will always be remembered.
Wow. I appreciate that so much. Like I said, this is you probably didn't hear it. This series is Down the Rabbit Hole. He does great work. He doesn't release a lot of videos. I'd have to see when his last one was. They're so good though. And this was amazing. It got a little technical in a couple of parts, but it had to. It had to. They really didn't have a lot of choice when they were doing the forum posts, because they had to let the next person who was taking over the save understand what was going on, what they were walking into, as best they could. I'm guessing not everybody did that, or they didn't really express it well enough, and that could be part of why things went so off the rails. The freaking elephants, man. I didn't have to contend with elephants in my game. Also, the re-release with the updated graphics, the music is good. Oh my gosh. What's up, Umbra? Yes, it is. It is. Boatmurdered. Though you're at the end of it. I just, unless I have some reason not to, I do try and watch the whole video. He's so, gosh. Would y'all want me to try and play Dwarf Fortress? I have played a little bit. I'm really bad at it. Not today, though. I'm going to play Cyberpunk. I'm going to step away really quick after this, and then I'll be in Cyberpunk. I am bad at it, don't get me wrong, but I mean, you're not really supposed, like, how is anybody good at this? Alright. That was it. So, yeah, let me get the link. My mouse doesn't want to move. Turn that off. That's fair. That's this video. And just to give Zoodle an idea, the last video he made was a year ago. And before that, it was like 2 years between that video and the EVE Online one. Did you listen to the EVE Online one, Umbra? I did. So almost 6 hours. Almost 6 hours. Oh my gosh, but it was good. I mean, that's a fair point that it might not, but I would be doing the one with the updated graphics. I would not be doing the ASCII version. Fair enough. It was good. It was a good video. I very much enjoy his stuff. I'm getting the game all set up before I go.
I see beyond the sea. Oh, Captain, can we find where the treasure be? I see beyond the sea. Oh, Captain,